Hey YouTube, this is a DIY on how to color fill your Glock 19 Gen 4 trigger with the serrated edges. I'm sure you could use this process on any other Glock models that have the serrated edge cut trigger. This process is pretty easy to do. Maybe a little time consuming, but I think it'll turn out great if you do it correctly. First, I started out taping up my trigger. It's not a really good tape job, but this is just for demonstration purposes only. I would just go ahead and tape up your trigger bar right here. Just make sure it's good and covered so that you don't have a lot of overspray. I also taped up the sides of my trigger here on both sides, on the back also, and on the bottom. Basically, you're just going to tape wherever you do not want to get paint oversprayed. Also, I actually taped up the center of my trigger here. I took a pair of scissors, cut a strip, and then I just taped it right down the middle here. I also taped my safety trigger. I did not tape it up in this video here. I was kind of lazy and I didn't feel like doing it. But if you take scissors, cut real small strips, and you can tape right around your trigger safety to prevent any kind of paint from going on there. Mainly because it's a pain in the butt trying to remove the paint from your trigger safety. Anyways, once you're done taping up your trigger, you're going to go ahead and paint the front face of your trigger. Now, here's the paint that I chose. I chose Rust-Oleum Universal Advanced Formula. It had the paint and primer all in one. I don't really think the paint and primer really means a whole lot. The main reason why I bought it was because I wanted the titanium silver. This paint also had a metal flake in it, which is kind of cool. It gave it a little extra shine to it, unlike a normal flat silver paint. But as far as paint goes, whatever you choose, red, gold, pink, green, and you do not have to use the exact spray paint that I have. You could choose another type of Rust-Oleum model. I just happen to like the titanium silver. So once you get it all taped up and you get your paint picked out, you can there's a couple different ways you can paint your trigger. You could either get a rubber glove, put it on, hold your trigger up in the air, and just air spray it. Granted, you might get paint on your hands and your arm. That's totally up to you. What I did was I actually just taped my trigger up to a hanger, let it dangle from a hanger, and then I actually took the hanger and hung it on a tree branch, and then I just sprayed my trigger while it was hanging from a tree branch. Now, as far as spray painting goes, you don't need to put a whole lot on, just enough to coat the trigger, enough to where all the black disappears. You don't need to put a real thick coat on it. But, you know, that's totally up to you. how crazy you get with the paint. Now after you're done spray painting, I would recommend at least 24 hours to let it dry and cure before you start handling it, because the trigger does stay sticky for a little while. So after you're done, you can go ahead and just peel off all your tape, and then you'll be left with paint on the front of your trigger. You may have a little bit of paint on the side of your trigger, like down in here, which is okay, because that paint can easily be removed, and I'm about to show you how you can do that with just household rubbing alcohol. The spray paint I used isn't real super strong, so it can be easily removed with rubbing alcohol. And if you do a bad spray paint job, just take the rubbing alcohol and just wipe off your whole trigger, and the paint will come off. But anyways, once you're done peeling your trigger, which I'm not going to peel this whole trigger back, you can start taking your rubbing alcohol, and I chose a cheesecloth. I would recommend a cheesecloth over a microfiber cloth, just because when you start removing paint, fibers from the microfiber cloth can possibly get stuck inside your trigger, inside the little grooves here, and also can get stuck to the paint. Now that you have your trigger cleaned up on the sides, you should be able to clean up your trigger on the bottom here with the rubbing alcohol. On the back side, that's if you have any overspray. I actually taped up mine pretty good to where you didn't have any overspray. After that's all done and you have most of that paint cleaned up, now the crucial step to removing the paint on your serrated edges is a little time consuming. You got to make sure it's just right, otherwise it'll look all jacked up and funny. But what you're going to do is you'll just dip your cheesecloth into the rubbing alcohol, and you'll slowly rub off some of the paint on both sides. Just start rubbing it off real light. Don't put a lot of pressure, because if you do, the paint will just start coming off in big sections, and you don't want that. Once you start taking off some of the paint, and you see some of the serrated edges starting to appear, that's what you want. You want the straight black lines of the serrated edges to show up. And I will show you what I'm talking about with the finished product. I'm sorry I didn't go ahead and spray paint this and show you how I removed the paint, but I just didn't feel like painting this trigger. So that being said, after you lightly take off some of the paint, some of these serrated edges will start to appear. And I can't find my trigger. Oh, here it is. So this is what you're going for. When you start wiping down your trigger with the cheesecloth and has the rubbing alcohol on it, it'll start leaving leftover paint on the edges, and it should give you a nice clean serrated look. And if you mess up, you can always take the rubbing alcohol and your cheesecloth and just rub all the paint off, respray it, and do it again. Just keep doing it over and over till you get the look that you want. And I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it just gives a little finishing touch to your trigger. You don't have to go spend $130, $150 on a brand new trigger just because you want it to be a different color. I understand if you want to get a different trigger for the performance, but for me, this was a carry gun, and I just wanted to have a little finishing touch on my trigger so it didn't look stock. So here's what it looks like in my 19. It's very subtle. You can barely notice it. Let's see if I can get it to focus a little bit better. Most people won't notice it unless they're really looking at your firearm and checking it out. But if you have any questions, comments, just leave them underneath this video. So thanks.